Very few people noticed, but one of the most mysterious cars in the first Fast and Furious movie is also one of the most controversial in the franchise's history. We're talking about the yellow Nissan Skyline R33, driven by Leon, a car that even had a nickname behind the scenes: Big Bird. What almost no one knows is that this car was seized by the US government and destroyed. That's right. The actual GTR used in the movie was literally crushed by federal authorities, and the reason is even more absurd than it sounds. Today, you're going to understand why this car was never supposed to be in the US in the first place, what it was doing there, and how a series of bureaucratic decisions and misinformation ended up removing one of the most iconic GTRs in cinema from the spotlight. There's filming drama, beef with Motorex, a federal investigation, and even a legal agreement to avoid criminal charges. But before we dive in, take a deep breath. This is one of those stories that shows how a passion for cars can clash with the coldness of the law, and not every story has a happy ending. Get ready, because what you're about to hear wasn't in the movies, and almost no one has told it in full detail. And of course, all in the style you already know. Straight, to the point, packed with information, and with deep respect for real car culture. The story of the yellow R33 Skyline begins long before its brief appearance in The Fast and the Furious. The car was imported by the well-known company Motorex, which had a reputation for bringing models like the R32, R33, and R34 into the United States. But here's the catch. That specific R33 entered the country on a temporary basis, authorized only for events and demonstrations, not for permanent road use. Even so, it ended up becoming part of the first movie's cast, albeit with limited screen time. The decision to use it in just a few scenes wasn't random. Technical advisor Craig Lieberman knew the car's potential, but there were two major concerns during production. First, they didn't want it to outshine Brian's orange Supra, which was the film's true automotive star. Second, and more critically, there was only that one R33 available. No backup, no stunt doubles, nothing. If anything happened to it during filming, there'd be no way to reshoot or maintain visual continuity. That's why the R33 only had quick appearances, but enough to catch the eye of anyone paying attention. After filming wrapped, the car was forgotten in the Motorex garage. Employee Sean Morris, a known name in the automotive scene, began using the car informally at events until the engine blew. And from that point on, Big Bird was literally parked and left without maintenance until it was sold. Still within the US, which already constituted a violation. And that's where things really started to unravel. The car passed through a few hands before ending up with Justin Bino, an enthusiast from Wisconsin. Bino knew the car had an unusual background, but he decided to go all in on its restoration anyway, spending over $100,000 between that R33 and another GTR he had acquired. His goal was to bring the car back to its former glory, and maybe even make it street legal someday. The problem was that the R33 had no visible VIN number, and it had entered the US under a waiver that didn't allow for regular use or resale. When Bino listed the car for sale, the state's DMV launched an investigation. An undercover agent posed as a buyer, and when Bino admitted the car couldn't be registered, the agent revealed his identity and seized the vehicle on the spot. The worst part? It wasn't just one car. Authorities also confiscated another GTR Bino owned, claiming both were illegally imported. And more. Bino was now facing criminal charges, despite claiming ignorance. The case went to court, and the Department of Justice offered a deal. Both GTRs would be destroyed, and in exchange, Bino would avoid prosecution. He tried to negotiate, suggesting he export the cars to another country, and even pointing out the R33's historic value from being in the film. But the government stood firm. To them, crushing the cars was easier than managing exceptions. And just like that, without ceremony, Leon's yellow Skyline R33, Big Bird, met the same fate as many iconic imports brought in outside legal channels. It was crushed and destroyed, supposedly in 2009. To this day, there are no confirmed videos or photos of the car's destruction. This has fueled conspiracy theories claiming the car still exists, hidden away by a collector or locked in a government facility. But officially, it's gone. And with it, a significant and dark chapter of automotive film history has also disappeared. This isn't just the story of a car. It's a reflection of how car passion can collide with rigid laws, bureaucracy, and policies that have little regard for culture. And it shows how, even with good intentions, many enthusiasts end up targeted by a system that sees cars not as cultural icons, but as illegal machines, stripped of their meaning, their legacy, and their soul. Even after the R33 was confiscated, there was one last attempt to save it. Justin Bino, aware of the car's historical importance, tried to convince the government to allow its export out of the US, arguing that the vehicle would never again circulate on American soil. The plan was to ship it to a country where its documentation could be legalized, and thus, at least preserve the car that had once been part of the Fast and Furious universe. But authorities deemed the process too troublesome and bureaucratic, opting instead for the simplest solution: total destruction. In 2012, case records indicate that the R33 was officially removed from the system, meaning it was either dismantled or crushed in a federal yard. However, to this day, no official images or videos of the destruction have ever been released. This has fueled several conspiracy theories among fans and enthusiasts. Some believe the car may have been secretly saved by a government employee or quietly sold to a private collector willing to keep it under the radar. Others think it was destroyed, but the process was kept out of the spotlight due to the cultural and emotional value the car held for many fans of the franchise. What makes this story even more bitter is the contrast with other cars from the series. While Brian's, Paul Walker's, Orange Supra was preserved and is now worth millions, Leon's R33, even though it was one of the first GTRs to appear in the saga, was overlooked, underused, and ultimately discarded. This highlights just how limited the initial production budget of the film really was, and how certain cars gained or lost prominence purely due to convenience or budget constraints. On top of that, US legislation regarding imported vehicles is extremely strict. The famous 25-year rule prohibits the import of vehicles that don't meet federal safety and emission standards, unless they're over 25 years old. At the time of the seizure, the R33 wasn't old enough to qualify under that rule, making it ineligible for legalization. Even when a car enters the US under a temporary exhibition status, it must leave the country once the authorized period expires. The problem is, many vehicles remain illegally, whether due to negligence, bad faith, or simple oversight. And when they're found, the penalty is severe: immediate confiscation and destruction, with no room for negotiation. Big Bird's case, it all came down to bad luck. It was in the country illegally, flew under the radar for years, was neglected, sold without an engine, and by the time someone finally tried to restore it, it was too late. The new owner, despite having genuine intentions of restoring and selling it, ended up being prosecuted and lost everything. His investment, time, and passion were crushed right along with the GTR's chassis. What's most frustrating is that none of the parties involved in the film's production took any responsibility. Universal, the technical advisors, the importers, all let the car be treated as just another asset, ignoring its cultural significance. And the government, for its part, followed the letter of the law, turning a blind eye to any symbolic or historical appeal. This story reveals a darker side of both the American automotive market and the film industry. The neglect of iconic vehicles, once the spotlight fades. Big Bird wasn't just a movie car. It was a symbol of an era when the JDM scene was still underground, when enthusiasts fought to legalize Japanese models, and when every GTR was a hidden treasure. The destruction of that R33 marks, in many ways, the end of that era. And that's how the story of Big Bird comes to an end. The yellow R33 that quietly shined in the first Fast and Furious, only to have its legacy wiped out by bureaucracy and neglect. A car that could be on display today in an automotive museum, celebrating JDM culture and its global influence, ended up scrapped in a government lot, treated like just another machine. More than just a GTR, Big Bird symbolizes how automotive passion often crashes into the cold wall of legislation and the lack of historical recognition. It was a survivor from a time when importing Japanese cars was almost an act of rebellion, a forgotten relic by those who should have protected it, and remembered only by those who truly live and breathe car culture. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going, because it's through shared ideas and respect for different views that car culture grows stronger. And if you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps support the channel and lets YouTube know you want to see more videos like this. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because here we keep it real, with information, deep dives, and a lot of passion for cars, especially when it comes to legendary names like the GTR. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got plenty of great content on the way. Thanks so much for watching until the end, and I'll see you in the next video.